A man threw his wife and children out into the snow and vanished without a trace the next night. But what no one expected was who came to protect them. This isn't a legend. I saw it with my own eyes. When I saw the wolf standing calmly at the gate, staring at the woman and her children, my breath caught because I knew this was no accident. The forest around us had fallen into an eerie silence, as if every bird and creature held its breath too. I froze, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient pine, my old bones trembling, not from cold, but from dread. Earlier that day, the woods had seemed alive with the usual bustle, the rustle of squirrels, the distant drumming of woodpeckers. But now, even the wind was hushed, drifting through bare branches like a ghost. I'd been wandering the edge of the clearing, checking traps and looking for signs of spring under the snow, when I heard it, the sharp crack of timber and a man's furious voice booming through the frosty air. "Get out!" he yelled. "You and those brats don't belong here!" Then a woman's desperate sob. "Please, not in the cold, please!" I paused, heart thudding so hard I thought the snow underfoot would shatter. I strained to catch more, but the trees swallowed most of it. As afternoon waned, I realized the old farmhouse next door stood empty of its usual warmth. The air smelled of smoke and fear. By dusk, the sky was bruised purple, and I saw her, huddled by the doorway, thin coat buttoned against the bite of winter, clutching two small shapes to her chest. The man she'd been married to, no doubt, thrust her out into the snow, his boots crunching as he slammed the door behind them. I watched from the tree line, inches from my face a veil of frost, too rooted in place by years of caution and the memory of accidents long past. I wanted to scream at him, run forward, tackle him, anything to stop this cruelty. But I'm an old man now, and my legs betray me. I stayed hidden, heart hammering, knuckles white against the bark. I thought of my late wife, of nights I carried hot milk to our children when they cried. How could I stand by and do nothing? Snowflakes drifted down, soft as feathers, landing on the woman's hair. Her children raised their heads, tiny faces red and raw from the cold, eyes wide with confusion. One clung to her skirt, the other reached out, fingers trembling. The wolf's gaze never wavered, intense and steady. Its fur was thick, a smoky gray mottled with white, as if winter itself had woven through his coat. I swallowed. The woman pressed her cheek against the older child's head, whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe promises, prayers, or apologies. The wolf took a cautious step closer, so close that I saw its breath puffing like steam. In that moment, time slowed. Snow hung in midair. The world held its breath. My pulse raced, and I felt sick, as if I'd swallowed ice. What would happen next? Would the wolf attack? Would it turn and snap at the woman's neck, or would it... No, that was impossible. With a quiet click of claws on wood, the wolf nudged a fresh carcass of a rabbit toward them. My throat tightened. It was half buried in snow, but still whole. The woman gasped. The younger child let out a small cry, and the wolf's ears flattened, calm but alert, as if it recognized that cry as a call for help. I wanted to step forward, make my presence known, protect them, but my joints screamed at me. I pressed a hand to my chest. My heart was a runaway horse. I thought of turning back, leaving, running for help. But who would come? The nearest neighbor was miles away, and by the time anyone arrived, they'd be frozen solid. The wolf's head dipped low. It gave another gentle push. The woman, tears in her eyes, scooped up the rabbit and held it to her children. I heard her whisper, "Thank you," though her voice cracked like dry ice. The wolf stood, body taut, eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, they were equals, hunter and hunted, human and beast, bound by the fragile thread of compassion. Then the man's voice barked from the open window, "Get back inside or I'll deal with you!" Fear flickered in the woman's face. She glanced back at the house, dread pooling in her eyes. The wolf growled low, a rumble like distant thunder, and the man recoiled. He cursed, slammed the window shut, and the clearing fell silent again. Darkness was settling like a blanket, and the wolf, having done what it came to do, turned and vanished into the trees. I watched its shape melt into shadows, felt a pang of loss sharper than any bullet wound. The woman gathered her children and stumbled toward the barn shelter, clutching the gift of the rabbit. I followed at a distance, too afraid to reveal myself, but unable to leave them entirely to fate. Later, I stood by the old fence and peered across the field, expecting to see nothing but moonlit drifts. Instead, I saw the wolf again, perched on a fallen log, watching me. Our eyes met. My breath froze. In those deep amber eyes, I sensed a judgment, not of me, but of the world's cruelty, and maybe forgiveness too. I shook my head as if to clear a dream. I turned away, trudged home through the snow, every step echoing in my ears. I lay in bed that night, staring at the cracks in my ceiling, trying to believe what I had seen. I thought I'd lived long enough to see it all. I was wrong. I thought that was the end. When dawn broke, I was the first to see them. Deep, precise paw prints pressed into the new snow, leading straight to the little gate of the shed. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. Pressing my face to the frosted pane, I stared at those tracks, too large and too elegant for a fox or marten, too deliberate for a stray dog. Only a day had passed since I'd witnessed that brutal expulsion of the mother and her two children into the biting cold, and already the forest whispered its own kind of justice. I slipped out of my own cabin, careful not to disturb the snoring old hound asleep by the hearth, and crept toward the woman's shed. Inside, she knelt by the small brick stove, coaxing embers to life with a broom of birch twigs. The warm, tangy scent of burning wood curled toward the low rafters, and in a corner, a loaf of dark rye bread lay cooling on a rough plank. The children huddled close, their small shoulders shaking with silent sobs, not from cold now, but from relief. I hesitated, buried in the hush of snowfall, torn between stepping forward and remaining unseen. Every part of me ached to help. My joints sang with the memory of lifting my own children, feeding them warm porridge long ago. But I was an old man, and my bones reminded me of past injuries. I stayed hidden, watching as the mother broke the bread into 3 pieces, pressing each child's share gently into their hands. When she looked up, her eyes met mine through the cracked glass, and I saw tears glinting on her lashes. I turned away, ashamed. Perhaps it was enough that I bore witness. Perhaps the forest itself would be their guardian. The next morning, I woke to the crunch of my own boots as I stepped outside. The world was a brilliant tapestry of ice and silver. Every twig shone like a crystal wand, but what caught my breath was waiting by the shed door. The pristine carcass of a hare, fur still glistening with frost, its small, delicate paws curled as if in sleep. A bead of frozen blood had settled on the snow, catching the pale light like a ruby. I crouched, reluctant to touch such a gift. My mind raced. Why would a wild creature bring its prey to humans rather than devour it itself? I felt a tremor of something I couldn't name. Fear? Reverence? I thought it a one-off, a message perhaps from the forest gods. I pictured the wolf in the deep woods, slipping through shadows with a burden in its jaws, driven by some instinct beyond hunger. I returned home to nurse that wonder, but sleep eluded me as my thoughts circled like caged birds. Morning number 3 arrived in the same spectral hush. I braced myself and made my way back to the shed. There, laid upon the threshold, was a small quail, so slight it looked as though the wind itself had deposited it there. Its feathers, ruffled by frost, hinted at its final flutter. The woman shivered in the doorway, gathering the gift as if it might vanish. Her children clutched at its warmth. In that moment, I knew this was no accident. For 3 consecutive nights, someone or something had hunted for them, carried food through the darkness, and laid it at their feet. I stood at the window, not believing my eyes. A wolf, feeding people, a beast, a predator, but he was a savior. The words battered through my mind like relentless hail. I stumbled back from the glass, heart racing, breath shallow. I pressed trembling fingers to my temples, as if I could steady the whirlwind in my head. How to explain this? A creature born to kill for its own survival, yet risking its life to sustain others? The forest had always seemed indifferent, even cruel. I'd trapped beavers and hunted deer, understood nature's impartial laws. Yet here was a defiance of those laws, a miracle carved in snow. I thought that was the end. I imagined nature would soon reclaim its spoils. The wolf, satisfied with a few gifts, would vanish back into the pines. The woman and her children would scavenge enough to survive until spring. But as night fell again, I sensed the forest bracing itself, preparing something else entirely. I slipped into my coat, grabbed a lantern, and followed the fresh prints into the darkness, determined to witness what the next dawn might bring. I waited until the moon had climbed high, a pale sentinel in the ink-black sky, before I crept from my cabin. My lantern's glow trembled against the snowy ground, but I dared not light it. The forest heard every snap of ice-crusted twig. I tucked myself into a hollow beside a fallen spruce, its needles cushioning the bite of the snow. Each breath felt like inhaling shards of glass, but I forced calm. Tonight I would discover who had been delivering food beneath the stars. Hours passed in a hush, so complete I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My legs ached, and my body begged me to flee back to the warmth of my stove, but I pressed on. Then, a faint rustle, soft, deliberate, echoed through the stillness. My lantern, tucked at my side, flickered as I raised my head. Out of the darkness, slender shapes slid across the snow, a pack of wolves moving with the precision of dancers in a silent ballet. My breath froze. They emerged into a moonlit clearing, but one figure broke from the group, stepping forward as if on a stage. He was massive, shoulders broad, coat a tapestry of grays and charcoal, yet it was his face that claimed my gaze. A long, pale scar ran from his right brow down to his jaw. His left eye was the soft amber of aged maple, his right, the icy blue of glacial water. He looked regal, like an ambassador between the wild and the world of men. Behind him, 5 others lingered in the shadows, heads bowed, waiting. None dared challenge the leader's silent authority. The wounded in me recognized something in his stance. A protector, a judge, a guardian of the weak. I held my breath as the leader padded forward, snow crunching under his great paws. He carried in his jaws the same hair I had seen by the shed 2 nights ago, its sleek body still warm. The other wolves fell in behind him as he approached the wooden door of that humble shelter. There he lowered the carcass delicately to the ground, teeth releasing their prize as if presenting an offering. For one impossible moment, he stood motionless, head raised, nostrils flaring in the chilly air. Then he looked not at his pack, but at the house itself, at the thin glow of the stove's chimney smoke, curling into the sky. It was a stare so human that I felt my knees tremble. It was the look of someone who carries a burden too heavy to ignore, of someone compelled to act by a force beyond instinct. Compassion. He lingered a heartbeat longer, as if ensuring the gift would be received, then turned and melted back into the forest, with his pack trailing silently behind him. I remained frozen where I sat, the echo of my own pulse thundering in my ears. My lantern lay forgotten, my joints numb from the cold. I dared not believe what I'd witnessed. As dawn's gray fingers tugged at the horizon, I rose, muscles stiff, and made my way back. Carrying the memory of that scarred face and mismatched eyes like talismans in my mind, I forced my legs to move. Back at my cabin, I paused at the window and peered toward the shed. The fresh carcass lay untouched, a testament to last night's miracle. I pressed my palm to the glass. "It's just chance," I muttered to myself, voice wavering. A wild beast, driven by hunger or curiosity, happened to leave a meal. I shook my head as though dispelling a dream. Surely, this was nothing more than a random intersection of wolf and human need. I poured myself a strong cup of black tea, its steam swirling in the cold air, and settled into my chair. I stared at the walls, the shadows twisting like smoke, and convinced myself it was merely luck, nothing more, a predator turning protector once in a million hunts. The forest remained inscrutable, and I, its humble witness, decided to chalk it up to fate's whim. But deep inside, as I sipped my tea, my heart refused to settle. That scarred ambassador of the wild had spoken without sound, and I could not shake the feeling that this encounter was more than coincidence, that the wolf and I had met on the edge of something greater than chance. The moon was still high when I heard the first stumbling steps approaching the shed. I'd been dozing by the stove, half awake, lulled by the crackle of embers. Then came a harsh, slurred shout. "Open up! I know you're in there." The voice belonged to the neighbor, the same man who'd thrown that desperate family out into the snow. Now he was drunk, angry, and wielding his anger like a weapon in the still night. I peered through the frost-blurred window just in time to see him slam his fist against the wooden door. The sound rang like a gunshot in the silent forest. His boots scraped the snow, sending up powder that sparkled in the lantern's glow. He ranted, his words indistinct, but venom dripped from every syllable. "Come out, you cowards. Thought you could hide from me." He kicked the door once, twice, then leaned close, spittle flecking the wood. Heart pounding, I expected the woman inside to plead for mercy, or worse, scream herself hoarse. But before she could move, something else slipped from the edge of the tree line. I caught a glimpse of silver fur, a sleek curve of muscle, and then absolute stillness. The wolf emerged as silently as smoke, stepping into the small pool of lantern light. His eyes were fixed on the man, calm but unflinching. The neighbor stumbled backward, eyes wild. "What the?" he stammered. The lantern clattered to the ground with a dull thud, its light dancing across the wolf's broad shoulders. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. Here was death incarnate, yet it moved with a purpose I could not fathom. The man screamed, a raw, animal sound, and turned to flee, but the wolf was faster. In one powerful lunge, the beast closed the distance. I braced for the worst, a vicious maul, blood staining the snow. Instead, the wolf stopped just short of the man's outstretched arm. He bared teeth in a warning snarl, low and resonant, a sound that rattled the trees themselves. Then, just as startling, he reared back on his haunches and snapped the man's coat clean off the straps, dragging it back a foot before releasing it to the snow. The neighbor tripped, sprawling into the drift, his curses swallowed by the wind. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. This was no hunting strike. It was a clear command to leave. The woman inside must have unlocked the door by then, for I saw her step out, arms protectively around her children. The wolf lowered his head to her level, meeting her gaze with an intensity that made my chest ache. He did not growl. He did not snap. He simply stood guard, a silent sentinel. The neighbor scrambled to his feet, scrambling away as though the snow itself were alive and clawing at him. He didn't pause until he'd reached the edge of the clearing. As he turned back for one last look, the moonlight glinted in his terrified eyes. Then he vanished into the woods, boots crunching faster than any runner's. I waited until his footsteps faded completely, until only the hush of falling snow remained, before I allowed myself to exhale. Inside the shed, the woman's knees trembled. She swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her child's cheek. The wolf gave a soft exhalation, a breath like a blessing, then melted back into the dark tree line, disappearing without a sound. I stumbled outside, snow crunching under my boots, and stood where the wolf had stood moments before. Empty air. The world felt raw, as if it had shed a layer of itself. I found the neighbor's discarded coat, cuffed in the snow, the fabric shredded but intact. I pressed my hand to the tears in the cloth and felt an odd surge of gratitude mixed with dread. Gratitude that the wolf had protected the innocent. Dread for the power that moved through that creature, an intelligence and a heart vast as the forest itself. The next morning, the village buzzed with rumors. The neighbor was gone, perhaps run off, perhaps lost forever in the woods. No one had seen him since that night. The woman and her children were safe, sheltered by neighbors who did not know how close they'd come to tragedy. And somewhere out there, a wolf roamed the pines, bearing scars I could not see and wisdom beyond any human's. If I had known then that this was only the beginning, I might have tried to follow him deeper into the forest. But my bones reminded me of my age, and my heart trembled at the thought of chasing such a guardian. All I could do was stand in the footprints of snow he left behind and wonder what would come next. The next morning, the village was alive with whispers. At the well, women leaned in close, exchanging theories in hushed tones. "He must have wandered off and died," one said, clutching her shawl. "Or been eaten by wolves," another replied, shuddering. The butcher swore he saw a dark shape slip between the trees, but no one dared venture into the woods to look. By midday, a battered police SUV rolled up the narrow lane, its lights flashing absurdly against the white landscape. Two officers stepped out, faces pale from the cold. They knocked on doors, took statements, scribbled in notebooks. "Did you see this man last night? Heard anything unusual?" they asked. No one had. No one saw him leave. No one heard a struggle. They found only his coat, torn but bloodless, draped over a fallen branch at the forest's edge. The officers photographed the scene, dusted for prints, but in the end, they packed their gear and drove away, saying, "Without a body or witnesses, there's nothing more we can do." The village returned to its routines, though no one spoke his name again. I alone held the truth, and I carried its weight like a stone in my chest. I couldn't tell them what I'd seen, that a wolf had faced him down, that I'd watched a beast of fang and fur drive a man away without harm, that the forest itself had delivered justice. If the authorities learned of such defiance, they would hunt the wolf mercilessly. I imagined hunters descending with rifles, packs of dogs, blood in their eyes. I couldn't bear that, so I lied. I told the officers I didn't know anything, that I was too old to follow tracks. Each lie cracked my heart a little more. Meanwhile, the mother and her children resumed their cautious life in the shed. Every evening, I saw her pause at the door, glance into the tree line as if expecting a miracle. One night, she stood with arms raised to the stars. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet, voice trembling with both fear and hope. "Thank you, whoever you are, up there." Her children pressed against her legs, eyes shining with wonder. I watched from a distance, my breath a plume in the moonlight, and felt my own tears freeze on my cheeks. The wolf continued to visit, but the offerings stopped. No more hares, no quails, no dinner parcels at dawn. Instead, I saw him slip from the shadows and stand beside their door, silent as a stone statue. He watched over them, head held high, breathing steam into the night. He never approached the hearth, never hovered with a gift. He simply remained, a sentinel on four legs, guardianship pure and unwavering. I once believed that nature's laws were absolute: hunt or be hunted, kill or be killed. But this wolf defied every rule I knew. He embodied something I could not name, an intelligence fused with compassion, a strength tempered by restraint. In his presence, fear dissolved and awe took its place. I found myself telling the children stories of him, painting his image in their young minds. Scarred leader, mismatched eyes, heart larger than the wilderness itself. When I shared these tales with the woman, she pressed my hand and nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "He is not a beast," she said softly, voice firm. "He is someone other, stronger than fear, wiser than people." I kept those words with me like a sacred vow. Every dawn, I checked the gate for fresh prints. Every dusk, I scanned the tree line for his silhouette, and each time I saw him standing there, still, unwavering, I understood that the world held mysteries far deeper than any man's laws. I didn't know what would happen next. The police wouldn't return. The villagers would forget the missing man and carry on. But I knew the wolf would remain, a silent guardian in the white expanse, and I, an old witness with a secret, would never stop believing that in the heart of winter, amid cruelty and despair, a wild soul had risen to protect the powerless, and in doing so had taught me that compassion is the true law of the wild. Spring arrived on silent pause. The snow melted in patches, revealing the pale green of new grass and the first brave flowers pushing through damp earth. I stood at the edge of the clearing, breathing in the warm, honeyed scent of thaw, and watched the shed's door hang open like a promise. The woman was packing her small cart for the long journey to the city. Baskets of jars, blankets, the few meager belongings they'd managed to keep through the winter. Her children darted between her legs, tugging at her coat sleeves, chattering with nervous excitement about the warm streets and crowded markets ahead. I felt a pang in my chest, as if my ribs had been gently squeezed. After all those nights, hare carcasses at dawn, quails tucked beneath the doorframe, the wolf standing sentinel through the blackest hours, I realized I'd grown accustomed to their presence. I'd begun to count on them, and now, as the rhythm of their deliveries slowed to nothing, I wondered if I'd been foolish to hope that such miracles could last. The cart's wooden wheels groaned as the woman hoisted herself up beside her elder child. She looked back then, her eyes searching mine from across the muddy yard. My heart thundered so loudly I could scarcely think. Was it a farewell? A plea? Gratitude? I lifted my hand in a trembling wave, but she didn't return it. Perhaps she thought it unsafe to linger. Perhaps she believed that whatever force had protected her through the darkest nights would continue unseen. I watched them trundle down the path toward the main road, the children's laughter growing distant, mingling with the cheerful twitter of spring birds. I told myself that this was it. This was the end. I pictured dawn bringing nothing but silence. The forest would resume its natural order. Wolves would hunt rabbits and deer, and I would return to my traps and my quiet loneliness. But the night had one more secret left for me. I settled by the same fallen log where I had hidden on countless nights, fog of breath curling in the chill air. The wind carried the scent of melting snow and damp pine needles. I draped my coat tighter around my shoulders, yet I could feel the anticipation thrumming through my veins. I glanced up at the moon, slender and silver, rising over the treetops. Its pale light pooled on the ground like liquid metal. I waited, listening. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate padding through broken branches. My old bones tensed, and I gripped my lantern, though I dared not light it. The steps paused just beyond its glow, and then he emerged, alone. He was larger now in the clearing, his fur matted with melting frost, droplets clinging to the coarse hairs like fallen stars. The silver scar across his muzzle stood out stark against the dark arc of his coat. He moved without sound, every muscle controlled, limbs gliding over the damp earth. My breath caught in my throat. I should have felt fear, but instead I was overwhelmed by a rush of something warmer, relief. He stopped only a few paces from me, closer than ever before. The lantern's faint gleam illuminated the amber of his good eye and the frozen blue of his other one. He tilted his head, nostrils flaring, as if drinking in the scent of spring and the ghosts of those he had protected. A single drop of water fell from the tip of his ear, and I felt it echo like a bell in my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to whisper a thank you or a prayer, but no words came. The world narrowed to the space between us. His gaze was steady, searching. I sensed the weight of all those nights, all those gifts laid at the doorstep of the shed, not born of malice, but of a will to protect. My legs trembled, and I sank to one knee in the softening snow. I felt every stitch in my threadbare coat, every ache in my joints, as though my body remembered each winter's hardship. Yet in that moment, none of it mattered. There was only him and me, suspended in a fragile truce between human frailty and the vast, mysterious kindness of the wild. He took a tentative step forward, closer still, until I could see each individual hair around his muzzle. Then, as if satisfied that I had understood, he held his ground, meeting my eyes with an intensity that stole the very air from my lungs. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, warm against the frozen world. A single tear carrying the weight of wonder, fear, gratitude, and awe. For a heartbeat, we remained like that, man and wolf, bound by an unspoken covenant. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned. I watched the curve of his haunches, the rhythm of his tail, the way his paws fell silent on the earth. He paused at the edge of the lantern's glow, glanced back once more, and melted into the shadows beyond. I lay there long after he was gone, staring at the empty clearing. My heart pounded with questions, with longing, with the echo of his gaze. I realized I would carry that moment for the rest of my days. In his eyes, there was no malice, no fear. There was wisdom, as if he was saying, "You understand now, don't you? Now you understand." The neighbor's cabin stood empty beneath the pale morning sky, its door swinging on rusty hinges as if inviting the wind to take what remained. I approached slowly, boots crunching on the thawing ground, and peered through the dusty window. Sunlight slanted into the dark room, illuminating overturned chairs, a single boot lying on its side, and nothing more. No sign of life, no tracks in the mud. The family was gone. Their cart had carried them away to the distant city, leaving behind only echoes. I shivered, remembering how those same walls had once echoed with the neighbor's drunken rage, the man who'd thrown them into the snow. Now his house was abandoned, as empty as the promise of his threats. A strange hush settled over the clearing, broken only by the drip of melting icicles. I wondered where he had gone, or if he had gone at all. I turned back toward my own cabin, eyes drawn once again to the well-worn path of prints leading away from the shed. Something tugged at me, an old curiosity mingled with dread. I crouched by the edge of the path, tracing a single paw mark with my gloved finger. The depth of the print told me more. A heavy weight, deliberate movements, paws sliding over thawing snow. But what struck me most was the direction. These weren't tracks coming from the depths of the woods. They were tracks going into the woods. All winter long, I'd imagined a wolf slipping from the pines to deliver food and deliver justice, guided by some secret loyalty to the suffering family. I'd believed the forest had reached out to them, that the wild had responded to human cruelty with compassion. But here, in the soft mud of spring, I saw it clearly. The wolf wasn't wandering at random. He knew where he was going, every single night. He came not by chance, but by choice. My breath caught as I followed the trail a few paces into the trees. The prints led to a hollow under a fallen oak, its roots exposed like gnarled fingers clutching the earth. There, buried half in moss and needles, lay a piece of torn cloth, faded and frayed at the edges. I recognized the pattern, the same plaid shirt the neighbor had worn that night. My heart lurched. The wolf must have torn it from him, carried it off into the forest like a trophy or a warning. I crouched and touched the cloth, its fibers still warm from human skin. I stood in the hush of the hollow and felt the weight of it all settle onto my shoulders. The wolf had not only protected the innocent, he had judged the guilty. He had taken from the man the very coat that had threatened women and children, yet he had not killed him. He had enacted a justice neither cruel nor vengeful, but measured, rightful. The more I thought about it, the more I understood. This was retribution, woven with mercy. I rose and retraced my steps to the cabin. Inside, the fire was still glowing in the hearth, embers smoldering in the ash. I washed my hands at the basin, but the cold water could not wash away the tremor in my heart. I sank onto a low wooden stool, wrapped my arms around myself, and stared at the fire as if expecting the wolf's eyes to appear in the dancing flames. My mind replayed every encounter: the first carcass of hare, the quail left at dawn, the sentinel in the night, the bleeding footprints in the soft mud. Each memory felt like a pulse under my skin, reminding me that what I'd witnessed was no random kindness, but a deliberate act of balance. Nature's own court, presided over by a creature of fang and fur. I thought I understood the laws of the wild: kill or be killed, predator or prey. But this wolf, this judge of the forest, had shown me a law far greater, that compassion and justice can walk hand in paw. He balanced the scales without tipping them too far, without cruelty. In those moments he had been more human than any man I'd known. A log fell in the hearth and I started, as if I'd been jolted awake from a dream. I realized I'd been sitting in silence for hours, enveloped in my own astonishment. My old joints protested as I stood, and I crossed to the window. Outside, the forest shimmered with new life, budding leaves, fresh moss, the promise of summer. But beneath that renewal lay the memory of winter's harshness and of one wolf's unwavering will. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and whispered to the empty woods, "I cannot forget you." A faint breeze stirred the pines in answer, and I smiled through tears. I sat by the stove long into the night, turning the wolf story over in my mind. I tried to understand how a beast could be kinder than a human, how a creature driven by instinct could choose mercy over malice. And though I searched for answers, I found only wonder. I sat by the stove and could not understand. How could a beast be kinder than a human? A year had slipped by like drifting snow. One morning, a thin envelope arrived, sealed with faded wax. My hand trembled as I broke it open. Inside, a letter from the woman. They had settled in the city. The children were healthy and growing fast, and she thanked me for keeping watch over them. I read her words by the dying embers of my hearth, each sentence warming a part of me I thought had long frozen. That afternoon, I strapped on my boots and walked toward the place where I'd seen the wolf for the first time. The trail had changed, winter's dead hush replaced by spring's lush chorus. But I recognized the bend in the creek, the fallen pine that lay across the path, the mossy hollow beneath its roots. My heart thudded, half in hope, half in dread. What if the wolf had moved on, following the river's whisper toward some other need? What if he was gone, and the magic of those nights was lost forever? I followed the old animal tracks, now softened by rain and new growth. They led not away but deeper into the trees, winding like a ribbon of memory through ferns and young birches. My pulse quickened. Something in the forest shifted. A hush, then a trembling vibration under my feet, as though the earth itself was listening. I paused in that sacred stillness, closed my eyes, and felt the old fear and wonder tangle in my chest. Then I heard it, a single, soaring howl that cut through the canopy and stung the air like a blade. Lonely, piercing, it rose and fell again, carrying centuries of forest secrets on its breath. When I heard that voice, my heart clenched. He was saying goodbye, or calling, or thanking. In that moment, the world snapped into sharp relief. I imagined him standing on a ridge, silhouette against the moon, scanning the horizon for the family he'd protected. I pictured the scar along his muzzle glistening like a silver seam. I saw his mismatched eyes, one warm amber, one cold blue, reflecting the deep truth that had guided him all winter, that compassion could bridge the gap between beast and man. If your heart is racing, you know, subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. Nature is wiser than we think. The howl faded into the rustle of leaves. A lone raven fluttered overhead, as though carrying news between worlds. My legs felt weak, and tears pricked at my eyes. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if holding the wolf's farewell inside me. Silence settled again, but I did not move. I let the forest envelop me, breathed in its ancient breath, felt the echo of those nights pulse in my veins. As the sky lightened toward dusk, I turned and walked back along the moss-covered path, clutching the memory of that voice like a lit torch. My tears left tracks in the mud, and I did not wipe them away. They were my own kind of footprints, proof that I had been here, that I had witnessed the impossible. I reached my cabin and sank onto the old wooden chair by the hearth. The fire had dwindled to glowing coals. I let the smoke curl around me, and my gaze drifted to the trees, visible through the frozen glass. I could almost see him there, watching, waiting for me to believe. If someone had told me this, I wouldn't have believed, but I saw it with my own eyes. And now, every night, when the wind sighs through the pines, I listen for his song. I close my eyes and remember that even in the harshest winter, a single act of mercy can outshine all cruelty. I whisper into the dark, "Thank you," wherever you roam, and I know, in the hush that follows, that he has heard me. If you have also encountered a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness." A wild wolf followed an old hunter through the taiga for 3 days, not to attack him, but to lead him to something. When the hunter finally realized why, he collapsed to the ground and wept like a child. You won't believe what this animal did. When I heard something snapping twigs to my left, I didn't jump. But when I saw who it was, my breath caught. A wolf stood and stared straight at me, as if waiting. I had set out at dawn, my old pack heavy on my back with canned meat, a canteen of water, a hatchet tied at my belt, and my grandfather's worn rifle slung over my shoulder. I've hunted these forests for 40 years. I thought I knew every whisper of wind and rustle of branch. The first day passed without incident. I followed deer trails, kicking at old footprints, marking them in my mind. By late afternoon, I made camp beside a mossy log beside a creek. My fire crackled. I fried a piece of bacon and sipped lukewarm coffee. The stars flared overhead. All was as it should be. I slept poorly. My dreams mixed with memories of my late wife and empty cabins. At dawn, I kicked at the embers and stood to stretch. That's when I saw them, prints in the soft mud, large, four-toed, unmistakable, wolf tracks. My heart didn't pound. I felt only curiosity. I'd seen wolves before, but these tracks were fresh, too fresh, and they didn't veer off. They followed my own path, as if someone walked in my footsteps. I narrowed my eyes and scanned the tree line. The pines stood silent, a green wall against the morning sun. I adjusted my pack and called into the forest. "Show yourself!" My voice cracked. A branch cracked. I stiffened. Then I saw him. Gray pelt mottled with silver, lean and tall, ears pricked. He stood 30 yards away, eyes fixed on me. He did not growl. He did not flee. He watched. A shiver ran down my spine. He looked at me like I was his only hope. I put my hand on my rifle. My finger hovered over the trigger. Part of me wanted to scare him off, but something held me back. Something in his gaze. Something I couldn't name. I lowered my hand. The wolf did not move. He simply observed. I knelt by the creek and scooped water into my canteen. Every few seconds, I glanced up. He stayed on the bank, just beyond the tangled roots. We were two hunters in a silent standoff. My pack felt heavier now. I forced myself to stand and slung it back onto my shoulders. I started walking again, leaving the creek behind. My boots sank into damp earth. I expected the wolf to vanish into the trees. He did not. Through the morning, I skirted ridges and low valleys. Each time I paused to sip water or tie my boot, I felt eyes on my back. I dared not look over my shoulder. I moved faster. My breath grew shallow. At midday, I stopped for lunch. I broke bread and tore cheese. I thought, it's just a lone wolf, hungry, curious. He'll wander off when he finds fresh deer or a rabbit. He's not bothering me. I ate in silence. I tossed scraps onto the ground, half expecting him to snatch them. He did not come. I stood and packed up. By mid-afternoon, the forest thinned. Sunlight dappled the trail. I felt more at ease. Maybe the wolf had tired of me. Maybe he'd gone hunting. Then I heard it again. That soft crack of a branch. I froze. My heart thudded. I spun around. There he was, just 20 paces away, emerging from the pines. He trotted toward me on silent paws. My breath caught. My finger twitched, but I held back. He stopped 10 feet away and sat, head tilted slightly. He stared. No aggression, no fear, just that unwavering gaze. I exhaled. I felt tears prick my eyes. This was impossible. A wild wolf, doing what a dog might never do, not attacking, not running, watching, waiting. He stood and padded closer, to within 5 feet. I felt the warmth of his breath in the cool air. I thought I could hear his heartbeat. He sat again. His tail swept the needles. In his eyes, I saw something like hope. My chest tightened. I thought of my wife, lost to sickness last year. I thought of my lonely cabin. I thought of a world that had grown cold and empty. This wolf had chosen to stay with me, chosen to share my path, chosen to wait. My mind reeled. I raised a hand palm out, as if to greet an old friend. He did not flinch. He had no collar, no sign of a trap, no signs of injury. Yet, he stayed. I knelt and reached for the pack on my back. My fingers trembled. I pulled out a small slab of jerky and set it gently on a flat rock. The wolf watched. Then, with careful steps, he approached. He sniffed. He looked up at me. Then he took it, slowly, respectfully. I felt my eyes burn. I sat down on a fallen log. He finished the jerky and sat back, licking his lips. He stared. The sky was turning gold. Shadows lengthened. I stood, unable to tear my eyes away. I thought, this ends when night falls. He'll go to join his pack, or stalk a deer. I'll finish my trapping line and head home. I took a step forward. He rose, ears forward. We moved in unison. My heart thundered. I thought it was a trick of the forest, a hallucination after years of solitude. But he was real. He was at my side. I whispered, "What are you doing with me, friend?" The forest answered with silence. I thought, it's just a lone wolf, following me in search of food. I was wrong. When I looked over my shoulder again, my heart seized. The wolf stood on the very edge of the trail, half in shadow beneath a spruce, staring at me without blinking. His gray coat rippled in the breeze, but his posture stayed rigid, like he was gauging whether I would keep coming. I took a cautious step forward, and he shifted a half pace back, neither fleeing nor advancing. That silent dance repeated itself 3 times over the next 10 minutes. I'd round a fallen log or skirt a tangle of roots, and there he'd be, standing exactly where the trail widened, watching my every move. By the time the sun broke through the canopy in slanted gold beams, I felt the first true twinge of alarm. Wolves usually avoid humans. They hunt deer, elk, rabbits, anything but people. Yet this one was tethered to my path, almost as if I were a moth to his lantern. He never growled, never bared teeth. Instead, whenever I paused to sip from my flask or tie a loose bootlace, he held his ground, head tilted slightly to one side, ears pricked. He was calm, but unwavering, an intensity in his amber eyes that I'd never seen in any wild creature. It was as if he were silently imploring something from me. He watched me like I was the last hope. In that moment, the hairs on the back of my neck lifted. His gaze carried a weight, a strange plea that made my chest ache. I glanced at the riverbank off to my left. Clear water danced over stones. A breeze stirred the reeds. All of nature around me seemed to pulse with expectancy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I lifted my rifle to my shoulder, finger trembling on the trigger guard. Yet every instinct screamed that he wasn't a threat. He was neither hungry nor frightened. He simply waited, measuring my heartbeats. My finger slid away from the trigger. I felt tears sting my eyes, though I didn't understand why. He padded forward 3 more paces, keeping exactly 20 yards between us. I unslung my pack and retrieved the last of my jerky, breaking off a small piece. My hands shook as I set it on a flat stone, then stepped back. The wolf approached deliberately, nose twitching, then looked up at me before taking the meat gently in his jaws. I sank onto a mossy log, my legs too weak to stand. The wolf finished the jerky, licked his lips, and resumed his vigil. Every breath I drew seemed amplified in the hush of the forest. I told myself it was a one-off, that he was curious, maybe orphaned, maybe drawn by the smell of my food. I would let him follow until dusk, then slip away while he hunted elsewhere. Yet each time I turned, he was right there, never closer than 10 paces, never farther than 30. He emerged on the trail again, just as I rounded a bend through a stand of young pines. My shadow stretched long behind me. His shadow clung at my heel. My pulse pounded so loud, I thought he must hear it. I dared not speak. He watched me like I was the last hope. I swallowed hard, caught between the primal urge to flee and a deeper, stranger urge to stay. I heard a twig snap beneath a boot, my own, and startled. He paused, then stepped fully into the sunlight, revealing a slight limp in his right front leg. A thin scar ran across his shoulder. He looked old, wiser than most wolves. He was no mere scavenger. My mind raced, wounded, alone, following a human stranger. Was I meant to guide him somewhere? Was he hurt and trusting me to help? Every rational thought tipped toward danger, but every heartbeat whispered compassion. I gathered what remained of my strength, reached into my pack, and produced a scrap of cloth. I knelt and offered it, half unwittingly, half in hope. He came closer, sniffed, and then, miraculously, lay down a few feet away, as if he'd accepted the gift. I watched, breath held, as he closed his eyes for the briefest moment. A bird call sounded high above, and he lifted his head instantly, alert. I exhaled a shaky laugh. This wild creature who could have seen me as prey instead placed a fraction of trust in me. My throat tightened. I stood slowly, believing our encounter would end here. I would stand, he would depart into the shadowy forest, and my heart would return to its normal rhythm. Instead, he rose too, matching my motion, and stepped forward, into the dense undergrowth, leading me deeper. I thought, this can't be real. There is no way a wolf should behave like this. And yet there he was, vanishing ahead of me on the trail, glancing back just once as if to say, "Come on." I told myself it must be a trick of the light, a trick of solitude. I shook my head. I thought it was impossible, but I was wrong. When dusk fell, I decided to test his intentions. I scattered a trail of dried meat toward a rocky outcrop, praying he wouldn't vanish into the woods. He padded after the scraps for a moment, nosed at a piece, then froze, ears perked, head tilted. He turned, met my eyes, and slipped silently back into the shadows, only 50 yards away. He didn't follow the bait. He just watched as if to say, "I know what you're doing." That night, I set a simple snare on the narrow game trail, thinking I might catch a rabbit or at least prove my point. This was a hunter's forest, not a playground for wolves. I anchored the noose beneath a sagging oak, checked it once, then built my fire a stone's throw away. The crackling flames cast long flickers across the clearing. I expected to awake to a twitching trap or to find my fire put out, anything to prove the forest's wildness. But morning came, and the noose lay untouched. Mud was trampled around it, but no sign of a rabbit. Instead, the only tracks leading away were those large lupine footprints, smooth and deliberate. I knelt, brushing soil aside, and saw that he had circumvented the trap entirely, stepping a careful loop around it, as if he respected its purpose or pitied my need to catch prey. Every night after that, I sensed him close, the soft pad-pad of paws just beyond the firelight. Sometimes I'd wake, heart thundering, convinced the wolf was sniffing at my back. One morning I emerged from my tent to find fresh prints circling my lean-to, almost ritualistically. Before leading off toward the deeper forest, I felt watched, protected, unnerved. On the fourth night, I failed to sleep and crept out to check the trap again. Moonlight shimmered on the cold steel, still untouched. I felt something like remorse. How could I strike at the one who had chosen to stay by my side? I recalled his amber eyes when I first offered jerky. I recalled the gentleness in his movements. I whispered to the darkness, "Why are you here?" But the only answer was the rustle of pine needles. I gathered the rope, untied my snare, and tucked it into my pack. The forest seemed to exhale around me. I was ashamed that I had set a trap for the one who might have been watching over me. Yet even after I removed the snare, the nights remained restless. I heard him pacing outside my shelter, as though keeping watch. Each time I poked my head out, he'd be there, sometimes at the edge of the firelight, sometimes perched on a fallen log, studying me. His posture was calm, but I could feel the tension in his flanks, a reminder that he was ever poised between trust and survival. On the sixth morning, I discovered my pack had been shifted. The flap that covered my clean shirt was left open, the tobacco pouch emptied of half its contents. I blamed myself for not tying it securely, but the prints around the camp suggested he'd rifled through my belongings with surprising delicacy, tucking the tobacco pouch on a stump, leaving the canteen untouched. It felt less like theft than investigation. I sat by the smoldering coals, heart sinking. I thought, he's teaching me something about respect, about boundaries, about what it means to share space. But still, doubt gnawed at me. Was he preparing to strike, or was this some test of my own character? That afternoon, I decided to follow him, to prove that he was simply an animal guided by instinct. I trailed his footprints through a bramble patch, over mossy stones, deeper into the pines. Each time I slowed, he slowed. When I paused, he halted and turned his head back to check on me. Each step we took in that silent communion shook me to my core. By twilight, we reached a small clearing where the sunlight danced on ferns. He stopped, sat, and looked at me. There was no hunger in his gaze, no fear, only this impossible calm. I knelt and placed my palm on a fallen log, feeling its rough bark. He approached, sniffed my hand, then pressed the side of his muzzle against it. The contact sent a jolt of warmth up my arm. an electric proof of connection between man and beast. My throat tightened. I traced the curve of his scar with my eyes and understood. He was wounded once, yet still free. He could have fled human scent, attacked my camp, or vanished into the wild. Instead, he stayed, patient, observant, forgiving. I stood and faced him. The first true tears fell down my cheeks. I bowed my head, ashamed of my trap, ashamed of my skepticism. He sat back and gave a low, almost tender woof, like an exhale of relief. I thought the wolf was merely curious and would soon wander off, but he did not. He rose and padded beside me, guiding me back toward my camp. And in that moment, I knew I could never see the forest the same way again. When I reached the fork in the trail on the fourth morning, my throat tightened. The sun had just crested the pines, and I knew the river lay somewhere beyond the next ridge, clear water shining, fish darting under the surface. I ducked beneath a low branch, hungry for a taste of fresh water, when I saw him. The wolf stood dead center on the worn path, broad shoulders blocking my way. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply held his ground, head high and ears forward, amber eyes fixed on me with unflinching calm. My heart thundered so loudly, I thought he must hear it. I stopped 5 paces away and swallowed, tasting pine resin on my tongue. My hand twitched toward my rifle, slung low across my back. I gripped the stock until my knuckles whitened, then raised it to my shoulder, finger grazing the trigger guard. He did not flinch. He did not cower. Instead, he stared as though weighing my purpose in these woods, deciding whether I deserved passage. I inhaled and exhaled, warily circling to look for another way around. But there was none. Thick brush on the right, a sheer bank on the left. The wolf was my only corridor to the river. I leveled the rifle. I thought to scare him off with a warning shot. I thought to force my way past with a bark of warning. But as I peered down the barrel, his gaze pinned me in place. I saw not malice, but an invitation, an impossible invitation. My finger struggled on the trigger until I forced it off. I lowered the rifle, trembling. The wolf's ears twitched, but he did not move. "Go on," I whispered, voice cracking. "Go on then." He turned his head just slightly as if to say, "Come this way." Then he pivoted on his haunches and walked down the path, tail low but steady. He did not hurry. He did not glance back in challenge. Instead, over his shoulder, he looked at me, eyes soft, expectant, urging. He might as well have spoken, "Follow me." I hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting my pack back onto my shoulder and stepping onto the trail he'd cleared. The soft pad of his paws echoed mine, the only sound in the hush of morning. Every nerve in my body trembled with doubt. I told myself, he's leading me to his den. I'll see pups or maybe another wolf. I'll watch from a safe distance and then I'll turn and go back to my camp. This is nothing more than curiosity, I reasoned, a wild animal guiding me to something in its territory. But with each step, disbelief churned in my chest. The forest pressed in around us, shafts of light dancing on dew-laden ferns, the scent of rich earth and pine resin filling my nostrils. Yet instead of feeling alone, I felt accompanied, partnered with this creature of fang and fur. At one point, he paused beneath a massive spruce and looked back. The sun glinted off his eyes, turning them liquid gold. I thought I saw a hint of mischief, or perhaps hope, flicker there. My legs ached, but I pressed on. We climbed a gentle rise, then descended into a narrow ravine where water trickled over mossy stones. The wolf stopped at the edge and sniffed the air. I dropped my pack and knelt to cup the cold water, drinking deeply until my lungs burned. When I looked up, he was sitting calmly on a flat rock, head tilted as if he approved of my haste. I felt a surge of gratitude I'd never thought to owe a beast. I whispered, "Thank you," though I knew he couldn't hear me. Still, he lifted his head and blinked, then rose to his feet. I hoisted my pack and beckoned toward the riverbank. He padded ahead, leading the way through thick undergrowth until we emerged onto smooth stones at the water's edge. The current shimmered, and fish broke the surface in quick flashes. He stopped at the edge of the stones, turned, and gave me one long, lingering look. My chest tightened, and tears sprung to my eyes. He'd brought me here, through unfamiliar trails, around treacherous ground, to this life-giving water. Then, as silently as he'd appeared, he pivoted and vanished into the trees. I knelt to fill my canteen, letting cold water trickle over my fingers. My mind reeled with the reality of what had just happened. A wild wolf, guiding me to safety, without fear or malice. I thought it was simply leading me to its den. I'd planned to watch, then leave, but instead, it led me straight to a miracle. When the morning light spilled through the pines, I saw that the path ahead had narrowed into a tangle of fallen logs and bristling underbrush. My legs felt leaden from the day before, but the wolf, ever my silent guide, pressed on. He moved with deliberate steps, weaving through the obstacles as though he knew every root and rock. I glanced back, half expecting to find a clear way home, but the thicket behind me closed in like a wall. I thought, perhaps here I can slip away, and yet, when I turned to leave by a side trail, he appeared again. He stood squarely across the narrow track, broad chest blocking any retreat. He did not growl, he did not bare his teeth. He simply sat down, sturdy as a fallen boulder, his gaze unwavering. A cold knot of panic tightened in my stomach. I realized he wasn't merely guiding me, he was insisting. His ears drooped slightly, and in the amber depths of his eyes, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion, and something deeper, a trembling fear. It was as if he had carried the weight of the forest on his shoulders and could bear it no longer. I stared at him, breath ragged. He sat there, his muzzle lowered just enough that I could see the muscles in his jaw slackening with fatigue. Every fiber of his being seemed to plead, "Hurry!" My heart lurched. I bowed my head, ashamed that I'd ever thought to turn back. I set down my pack and knelt beside him. The forest floor was littered with pine needles, needles that cushioned his heavy paws. His fur was matted in clumps, and I noticed a fresh cut along his side, raw and angry. I'd been so focused on following that I hadn't seen him bleed. I reached out a trembling hand, and he flinched, but only once. Then, as if deciding I could be trusted, he shifted his weight and tucked his wounded leg under him. He let out a soft woof, a breathy sigh of weariness. That moment stunned me. A wild beast, wounded and alone, had placed his last reserve of trust in a stranger. I felt tears sting my eyes. I pressed my palm against the side of his head, feeling coarse fur and the slight quiver of his pain. My mind raced. Was I guiding him to safety? Or was he guiding me to something far darker? A trap, a den of danger? Yet when I glanced around, I saw no signs of other creatures, no scent markers indicating a pack, only the endless hush of the taiga. I stood slowly, helping him rise. He limped forward, each step a testament to his will. I slid my rifle strap over my shoulder and offered him my hand again. He bumped his nose into my palm, then turned toward the deeper woods, eyes bright with unshed tears, his silent plea echoing in my bones. "I'm with you," I whispered. "Tell me where." The path wound upward now, the trees thinning to reveal rocky crags and sheer drops. At times I slipped on wet stones and had to catch myself on saplings. Each time I nearly fell, he paused and looked back, as though to ensure I was still following. His tail would sweep anxiously. At midday we reached a mossy ledge overlooking a steep valley. The wind gusted cold, whipping at my coat. Below, a narrow ribbon of mist clung to the undergrowth. The wolf halted at the edge, scanning the drop with narrowed eyes. He dropped to his haunches and let out a low, mournful yip, almost a cry. My breath caught. I'd interpreted his guidance as a rescue mission, but this cry felt like a warning, yet there was no time to ponder. He limped past the edge, heading down a narrow gully that disappeared from sight. I hesitated at the precipice, then steeled myself and followed. Rocks shifted underfoot, and my heart hammered as I slipped twice. But every time I reached for stability, I felt his presence, just below me, lifting me onward. When at last I stumbled out of the gully, I found myself in a hidden alcove where the sun broke through, illuminating a shallow pool. The water shimmered invitedly. The wolf crept forward and lowered himself, lap by lap, to drink. Each sip drew ripples across the surface, mirroring the tremor in his limbs. He drank deeply, then lifted his head and shook off droplets of water like rain. I watched him, marveling. He'd led me into danger, through unforgiving terrain, and now he drank from this secret spring. I knelt beside the pool, cupped my hands, and took a cold, bracing mouthful. When I looked up, the wolf was standing again, head held high. His wounds seemed less raw, his eyes brighter. He stood like a leader who'd just reclaimed his strength. In that moment, I believed he was leading me to his lair, his home. I steeled myself to peer into whatever dark hollow lay ahead, determined to see the rest of his world before parting ways. I thought maybe he was simply defending his territory, and I would watch, learn, then respectfully leave his realm. But as I followed him from the pool deeper into the cavernous grove, I realized this was more than territory. It was a journey of trust, his and mine intertwined, and I could no longer turn back. The wind had turned icy by late afternoon, and I nearly lost sight of him as the shadows grew long. He slipped between trunks and under low boughs, blending with the forest's gray-green haze. I stumbled over a mossy root, and when I looked up, he was gone. My breath froze in my lungs. I called his name once, then again, but the forest swallowed my voice. I set off down the slope, branches scraping my sleeves. Each footstep felt louder than the last, as if the trees themselves listened. Then I heard it, a soft, quavering sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. My heart thudded. A child's voice, a girl's. I shook my head, certain I was imagining things. But the sound came again, sorrowful and thin, echoing between bare trunks. I pressed forward, following the sound. Snow-dusted ferns brushed my coat. My lips moved without thought. "Hello?" The voice came clearer, a single word I couldn't make out, but laced with fear. I rounded a fallen pine and froze. There, in a shallow hollow, lay small footprints pressed into mud, tiny toes splayed, half covered by leaves. My chest tightened. Human prints, not deer or fox. They led up the bank toward a cluster of birch saplings. My legs shook as I followed them. The voice grew louder, soft sobs punctuated by gasps of cold air. I risked a glimpse through the saplings and saw her. A little girl curled against a fallen log, arms wrapped around her knees, her thin coat soaked through. Tears glistened on her cheeks. My breath caught. The wolf sat a few yards away, silent, unmoving. He did not paw at her, did not growl when I approached. He simply waited, his head low, eyes fixed on the child with a gentle intensity. And in that moment, I realized the wolf was guiding me not to himself, but to someone else. My fingers trembled as I reached for the girl. She flinched at the sight of me, eyes wide with terror. I knelt slowly, hands open. "It's all right," I whispered. Her teeth chattered. I draped my coat over her shoulders, lifting her gently. She buried her face in the wool, and I felt her shiver. I looked up at the wolf. He rose and took a few steps closer, then sat again, as if to say, "She's safe now." His tail thumped once against the moss. I felt my eyes burn with shock and wonder. This wild creature, he had led me through days of uncertainty, not to prove his dominance, but to bring me here, to a child on the brink of despair. I thought, perhaps it's just a lost child, and the wolf followed out of curiosity, but that didn't fit. He had gone to such lengths, endured danger and fatigue, to find her. No mere curiosity could drive him. He had saved her, and I had taken credit for his path. I stood, holding the girl close, her small arms clinging to me. The wolf watched, silent sentinel, until I turned to face him. His eyes held neither fear nor reproach, but a calm relief, as though his mission was complete. I had never believed a creature so wild could feel gratitude or purpose beyond survival. Yet here he was, proof of something deeper, that nature's compassion runs alongside its ferocity. As I carried the girl toward my camp, I heard him padding behind us, each step a steady promise of protection. My heart choked on the enormity of it all. I breathed in the cold air and whispered, "Thank you," though I knew he'd never understand the words. But I understood, and I would never be the same. When I eased her into the forked roots of the old spruce, her body went limp, and I felt a chill run down my spine. She lay there half submerged in a cradle of moss and fallen needles, small limbs tangled in twigs. Her breath came shallow, and when she tried to speak, only a faint moan escaped her lips. Beside her, the wolf sat alert, tail curled around his paws, ears pricked. He did not gnaw at a bone or prowl the perimeter. He simply kept watch, as though nothing mattered more than guarding this fragile girl. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead, and the wolf's coat rippled in the dim light, but he never wavered. I knelt and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and for a moment I thought she didn't know where she was. She whispered something I couldn't understand, words half-formed, like a dream dissolving at dawn. Her hand flexed, slipped from my grasp, and twitched once against the cold earth. My throat tightened. I glanced at the wolf, and in his golden eyes I saw a quiet intensity, no hunger, no fear, only unwavering vigilance. He'd stayed by her side all this time, through every trap I set and every false turn I tried to take. He had sheltered her with his presence when I worried only about myself. I bent to press my cheek against her clammy skin. She smelled of pine resin and the faint sweetness of sap. I felt tears sting my eyes as I realized, if not for that wolf, she wouldn't be here. He had found her before I even knew she was lost. He had refused to leave her, even when his own wounds ached and the forest grew cold. I steadied my voice. "Hey," I said, "I'm here now. You're safe." She blinked and managed to nod once, then drifted back toward sleep. I let out a shaky breath and sat back on my heels, heart hammering in my chest. The wolf rose and padded forward, sniffed her coat, then pressed his muzzle gently to her shoulder. He gave a low, rumbling breath that sounded almost like a sigh of relief. I watched, transfixed, as he circled her and settled at her feet, still guarding, still sure. I reached into my pack for a blanket and draped it carefully around her shoulders. Each motion felt slow, as though I were moving through water. When I straightened, the wolf lifted his head and met my gaze. In that look lay the story of every mile he had traveled, struggle, hope, and an unspoken promise kept. I swallowed hard, voice thick. "I owe you more than I'll ever repay." He cocked his head, as if pondering the debt, then gave a single, soft woof, half question, half acknowledgement. I turned back to the girl. She moaned softly and curled into the blanket, her breathing steadier now. Relief flooded me. My eyes blurred as I realized how close we'd come to tragedy. I thought, I can finally lead her back to safety. I'll carry her to my camp, build a fire, warm her up, and then we'll go find help. The wolf will fade into the woods, and I'll tell the story of my brave companion. but the wolf did not move. He remained seated, head bowed slightly, waiting for me to follow. He seemed to say, "This is not the end of my watch. This soul came into your care, but I brought you here." My breath caught. I straightened and nodded. "All right," I whispered. "Show me the way." He rose smoothly, turned toward the deeper trees, and paused just long enough to ensure I was behind him. I scooped the girl into my arms, light as a bundle of autumn leaves, and rose to follow. The wolf led us through narrow shafts of moonlight, his pace steady despite the darkness. Each step was measured, deliberate, as though he could sense every creak of a broken branch and every gasp of cold air. The girl stirred once, mumbling, but did not wake fully. I stumbled over roots and stumbled again on stones, my arms aching under the girl's weight. Yet every time I faltered, I felt the wolf glance back, meeting my eyes, urging me onward. He navigated the twists and turns as if the forest itself were carved to his memory. After what felt like an eternity, we broke through a dense curtain of undergrowth into a moonlit clearing. I recognized the spot. It was the ridge above my campsite. Fatigue melted away, replaced by a surge of gratitude and wonder. I laid the girl gently on a bed of pine boughs I'd set out earlier. She shivered but nestled deeper into the blanket. The wolf sat at the edge of the firelight, head turned toward me, waiting. I stared at him, words failing. "You did this," I choked out. "You saved her." He met my gaze one last time, as if to confirm the truth of it, then rose and slipped back into the forest, vanishing among the shadows. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed. I understood, finally, that this was no ordinary animal, but a guardian of the wild, a creature capable of compassion beyond my imagining. I lifted my hands to the sky, voice trembling. I thought maybe he was just defending his territory, but I was wrong. When the girl's lips curled into a hint of rest, I knew she was finally dreaming peacefully. The fire crackled between us, its warm glow chasing away the evening's chill. I gathered dry kindling and coaxed the flames higher, then dug into my pack for the last of the jerky and a tin of beans. Gently, I coaxed the food into the hot pan, savoring the hiss as oil met meat. I returned to her side, settling onto a fallen log. She lay swaddled in my coat, chest rising and falling in the rhythm of sleep. I dipped a spoon into the steaming beans and lifted it to her lips. She took the bite without waking, then exhaled in her sleep, a small smile flickering across her face. Beyond the firelight, a silhouette formed at the tree line. The wolf sat, body still, eyes fixed on us. He did not step closer. He did not whine or nudge. He simply watched. The silver in his pelt glinted under the moon, and I felt his gaze like a weight on my shoulder, silent, wary, protective. I turned toward him. "She's safe," I said softly. My voice sounded foreign in the hush. The wolf's ears flicked, but he remained unmoving. He watched me feed her, watched her settle deeper into the blanket, and then turned his head to the sky, nostrils flaring as if tasting the forest's promise. In her dreams, the girl murmured, her voice low and tender, "Siri, you kept me safe. You are kind." My breath caught in my throat. Siri, Gray One, was the name I'd given him when I first saw his mottled coat. The girl's voice, even in sleep, carried gratitude I could scarcely comprehend. A wild wolf, dubbed nothing more than Prince of the Taiga in hunters' tales, had become her guardian. I stared at the wolf, struggling to knit together what logic I had left. He should have vanished the moment she awoke, or when the first sparks flew. Instead, he had lingered, through my cooking, through my whispered reassurances, through her fragile dreams. I stood and approached the edge of the firelight, boots crunching on pine needles. The wolf remained seated, head held high. His eyes glowed with something beyond the wild, purpose. I raised a hand, uncertain what to say. He left without waiting for thanks. I whispered to the night, because he knew. He'd done the most important thing. He shifted, rose, and with one last lingering look, turned away. He did not pause for a second glance or a final nuzzle. He melted into the shadows of the pines, every step silent. Moonlight traced his spine as he slipped beyond sight, like a memory dissolving at dawn. I sank beside the girl, tears pricking my eyes. The forest exhaled around me, leaves rustled, distant owls hooted, and the last embers danced. I pressed a hand to my chest, where my heart still pounded with awe. I thought this would be the end of our story. I'd build her a shelter, warm her bones, guide her home at first light, and Siri would be a tale I told by hearths, a legend of mercy in the wild. But deep in my bones, I knew the real journey was just beginning. The wolf had shown me that nature holds wisdom beyond our reckoning, that kindness can live in the teeth of the wild, and that some bonds transcend words. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind in the pines and the soft breathing of the sleeping child. As dawn stirred the horizon, I vowed to carry this moment forever, to live with the understanding that sometimes the greatest miracles walk on four paws and vanish without fanfare, leaving only the echo of their grace. That morning, the frost still clung to the pine needles when I crawled from my bedroll and stepped into the hush of dawn. The embers of last night's fire were cold, only a thin wisp of smoke curled into the pink sky. I knelt beside the girl, now wrapped in blankets and breathing steadily, and my eyes drifted to the ground around her feet. There, pressed into the frozen earth, were tracks, 2 days' worth of them, leading in a perfect ring around her resting place. Paw prints, deep, deliberate, unwavering. My breath caught. The wolf had lain watch over her not for minutes or hours, but for all the time she'd been lost. He had found her first, discovered her shivering under that fallen spruce, yet he had done nothing to harm her. He had neither driven me away nor claimed her as prey. Instead, he had waited, through hunger, through cold, through weariness, for someone to come. A tremor ran through me. I traced the edge of a print with a bare fingertip. It was jagged where he'd slipped in the mud and worn down where he'd lifted his paw again and again. I realized I had been following him for 3 days. 3 days of fear and awe, of doubt and wonder, never guessing that by doing so, I was witnessing something far greater than any hunt or hardship I had ever known. Tears pricked my eyes as I fell to my knees. My hands dug into the frozen soil, clutching handfuls of earth and moss. I bowed my head, overcome. How could I ever explain this? How could I reconcile the brutality I had always believed ruled the taiga with the mercy of this solitary wolf? I slammed my fist against the ground. The sound cracked in the morning air, salty tears mixed with grit on my cheek. I couldn't stop the words that tore from my lips. Why did you do it? Why were you kinder than us? My voice echoed between the trees. No answer came, only the soft sigh of wind through the spruce branches. I knew he was gone, had vanished before first light, unwilling to wait for my gratitude or my questions, because he had done what mattered most. I straightened, voice trembling but determined. I cannot believe this, but I saw it. I followed the beast, and it was a human soul that was saved. I gathered the girl into my arms as she stirred, blinking up at me with new, untroubled eyes. I wrapped her in my coat and rose, carrying her to the river where the water ran clear and cold. As I knelt to fill my canteen, I let her sip the life-giving flow. Each swallow seemed to wash away the tension in my bones, yet the memory of his sacrifice, his silent, steadfast care, stayed with me like a living thing. I settled her by the riverbank and built a fire. Flames licked the wet stones, sending sparks into the pale sky. I fed her bread and warmed her fingers around the mug of coffee I'd brewed. She drank, gazed at the flames, then whispered sleepily. He was so gentle. He stayed with me. I nodded, voice thick. Yes, he stayed with you. The sun climbed higher, gilding the treetops. I scooped her into my arms again, cradling her like the precious soul he had protected. Behind me, the forest pulsed with life, birds calling, wind rustling, the river's steady rush. But my mind was fixed on those wolf tracks encircling her sleeping form, the emblem of a bond that transcended blood and pack. As I set out along the trail toward home, I felt eyes on my back, an old echo of his vigil. I dared one look over my shoulder through the bending pines. There, at the edge of light and shadow, I thought I glimpsed a flash of silver fur, just for a heartbeat. Then he melted away, leaving only the memory of his devotion. My chest tightened. I thought of all the hunts I had led, all the forest paths I had cut, convinced I was the master of these woods. How blind I had been. The true guardian had walked beside me in silence, guided me through danger, and saved a helpless child. I rounded a bend and felt the weight of his absence like a hollow in my soul. I pressed on, carried by a mixture of wonder and reverence. I understood now that the forest held wisdom deeper than any man's mind, and that compassion could be found in the most unexpected places, even in the heart of a wild wolf. When I reached the clearing where I'd first built camp, the girl clung to my coat, eyes bright with gratitude. I set her down and looked to the tree line. I whispered to the pines and the wind and the unseen spirit of the wolf, "Thank you for showing me what it means to care." Then I turned to the girl and offered her my hand. Together we walked out of the forest's embrace and into the world beyond, forever changed by the mercy of a creature I once thought could only kill or flee. If your heart is pounding right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we tell the truth. Nature is full of mysteries. If you believe in a special bond with animals, we are not alone in this world.